And continuing our coverage of the first day of the 2022 legislative session, I'm your host, Mike McClanahan, and I've got House Republican Leader J.T. Wilcox standing by. Welcome in, Representative Wilcox.
Thank you very much, Mike. Happy to be part of this.
So we've got 10 minutes. Let's start with an overview of your top priorities, your caucus's top priorities for this short legislative session.
Well, first of all, Mike, we feel strongly that it's time for us to see the kind of government that we all grew up with, and that we need to have three branches of government fully functional and reviewing the things that the governor does rather than embarking on our third year of emergency powers. So we have a bill that was dropped by Chris Corey that is very reasonable. It is the bill that I would want if I was the speaker and if the governor was a Republican. It's not to end the use of emergency powers forever. It's to say that the legislature has a responsibility for oversight and that we should be doing as many things through the three branches as possible. And I think that the Democrats are beginning to agree with us. We're certainly trying to help them understand the importance of this. Next, it's plain that there were some tragic mistakes made last year in legislation that was designed to create public safety reform. And police forces and citizens all over the state of Washington have had to deal with the consequences. I know that the Democrats want to perform some fixes on this. Sadly, every single one of the fixes had already been offered last year before there was any additional tragedy as amendments by the House Republicans. And I believe that some of those things are going to happen. We think that we should probably go further with some of these things. And so there's going to be a little bit of discussion going on about that. Next, another thing that Democrats have admitted was deeply flawed, that is the long-term healthcare tax. We think that it should be repealed and replaced with one that is voluntary and has private sector involvement. Representative Drew Stokesbury has a bill that does that, and Representative Peter Abarno has been very outspoken in ways to repeal and, if necessary, fix it, although most of us think that it's unfixable. Two other major issues. We have environmental efforts led by House Republican Mary Dye that says we have a lot of money available to do environmental projects. Let's do the environmental projects that we can actually accomplish that will produce better results, especially in the arena of health for people and for salmon and orca in the environmental world. And her bills are going to be getting a hearing. I'm really interested in this Republican approach to solving environmental problems. And lastly, we've been saying for some time that it's time to look to the general fund to do more of the large transportation projects and maintenance that's necessary. Andrew Barkas presented a comprehensive plan. In fact, one of the biggest plans ever presented. It required no new gas taxes, and I see now that Democrats are starting to talk about something very similar. And so maybe we have some room for agreement on these issues.
I want to change topics here a little bit and get your take on a proposal from the governor. Where do you stand on Governor Inslee's plan to regulate what candidates and elected officials can say about elections and basically ban statements that are false or can be determined to be false and that are determined to have the potential to incite violence?
You know, we all swear an oath. We're going to do it today, I think, to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the United States and the state of Washington. And I think free speech is a big part of that. Criminalizing, which is what he's proposing, political speech doesn't seem like a very good idea, regardless of what kind of political speech you don't like. And you're never going to see Republicans propose that we criminalize speech.
In terms of the economy and the state budget, there is a multi-billion-dollar budget surplus on paper heading into this year, and you've got record inflation out here in the rest of Washington that citizens are dealing with. What sort of tax relief do you think we are likely to see, and what would you propose?
Well, I think the first thing that we should be aware of is coming down the pike are immense increases in the cost of gas. These are not exactly taxes, but these are carbon pricing and carbon regulation schemes that were passed by the majority last year. No Republican votes on these things. They have not even started having an impact yet. So we're going to stand foursquare for using much of this surplus to do the road projects that are necessary, because you just simply cannot ask hard-pressed commuters to pay even more for gas than is already going to be imposed by these schemes that were passed last year. There are two major taxes that I think fall especially hard on working people. Those are property taxes and sales taxes, and we would be in favor of rollbacks in either one of those.
And speaking with Senate Majority Leader Andy Billig, he said there's the possibility that maybe the working families tax credit could be expanded to offer more relief. Is that something that you would support, and do you think that that's something we're likely to see happen?
Well, since the first budget that ever included actually funding that was the Republican budget presented last year by Drew Stokesbury, we are very much in favor of that program. I would like to see broader tax relief, not only that program, since it was funded for the first time after being proposed and passed 10 years ago, but never ever funded by those who proposed it. So I would prefer the two options that I mentioned, since that touches everybody in the state.
I want to ask a little bit about the transportation infrastructure package, transportation funding package that was discussed in 2021 but never materialized. And you touched on transportation earlier. What do you think we're likely to see under the change in leadership at the Senate Transportation Committee related to transportation funding?
Well, there has been very little communication with House Republicans on transportation plans. I just talked with our lead, Representative Andrew Barkas, who, as I mentioned, proposed one of the, if not the most innovative look at how do we fund these projects in the last 20 or 30 years. But there have not been meetings that have been called by the Democratic chairs on transportation for quite a few months. And he's looking forward to having some of those meetings so we know what happens. I understand that Senator Leas presented some ideas yesterday, and the one thing that I know about them is that he said that there was going to be no gas tax this year. That's something that Republicans believe in strongly, as you've heard from me, and that's a nice place to start.
So with just about 2 minutes left here, what issue do you think isn't getting a lot of coverage that's likely to become a hot topic in the legislature, if you're aware of any at this point?
Well, those are often unpredictable, but I think that the one that people haven't really caught up with yet is Representative Mary Dye. She's the House Republican lead on the environment. And I mentioned this a little while ago. She has some very large proposals that will do things like provide enough wastewater handling capacity so that cities and towns in the Puget Sound area don't have to put polluted water into the Puget Sound anymore. People talk about this all the time. They never fund it. She has proposals that will take dollars away from some environmental projects that are unachievable and do things that can actually be done. And believe it or not, this is someone who represents the far corner of Eastern Washington, and she's trying to do something that will promote the economy and the quality of life in the Puget Sound area. I think that deserves a lot more consideration. She's also proposing that we use those dollars that are available to fund access to our state parks, so that doesn't have to, be an extra burden on young families and working families. And also increase the supply of well cared for and well maintained parks. And I think that this is something that deserves a lot more attention than it's gotten so far.
Well, that will bring our time to a close. But again, I'd like to thank you, Representative Wilcox, House Republican Leader. We appreciate you sharing your time on the busy first day of the legislative session for 2022.